The day I retired after 42 years as a nurse, I gave my daughter the most meaningful gift I had ever created. Inside a handmade memory box were photographs, letters, and pieces of a lifetime spent loving her. She opened it in front of our family, glanced inside, and rolled her eyes. Then she laughed softly and said, "Mom, this is just a box of old stuff." Everyone went quiet. I smiled so nobody would see my heart breaking. But in that moment, I realized something painful. My daughter didn't value what I had spent my entire life giving her. And a few days later, I quietly returned the favor with my will. Before we continue, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever given someone your whole heart, only to realize they never appreciated it? Let me know in the comments. And if stories about family life lessons and unexpected twists speak to you, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It truly helps, more than you know. Also, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel and connecting with people around the world. My name is Monica Dunn, and for most of my life, I believed that love was measured by sacrifice. Not flowers, not grand speeches, not expensive gifts, sacrifice. The kind that quietly steals pieces of your own life so someone else can have a better one. I was 25 years old when my husband Michael died in a highway accident outside Columbus, Ohio. One moment, I was a wife planning a family vacation. The next, I was a widow standing beside a hospital bed trying to understand how a healthy man could disappear from my future in a single afternoon. Our daughter Lauren was only 8 years old. I remember looking at her sleeping face that night and making a promise. No matter how hard life became, she would never feel abandoned. I would carry the weight for both of us. At the time, I truly believed love could fix everything. I didn't know that sometimes love, when given without limits, can create its own kind of blindness. The years after Michael's death were a blur of exhaustion. I worked as a nurse at Riverside Methodist Hospital. My shifts were long. My paycheck was never enough. Some weeks I worked 6 days. Other weeks I accepted every overtime opportunity available. I spent countless nights walking hospital hallways while other mothers were reading bedtime stories. I missed school concerts. I missed soccer games. I missed birthday parties. Every missed moment left a scar on my heart. But I told myself it was temporary. I was building a future for Lauren. Whenever guilt threatened to overwhelm me, I would look at her sleeping peacefully in her room and remind myself why I was doing it. She never complained, at least not when she was young. Lauren was a bright child, smart, funny, beautiful, the kind of little girl who could make strangers smile without even trying. Teachers loved her. Neighbors adored her. And I adored her more than anyone. Every decision I made revolved around her future. When friends encouraged me to start dating again, I refused. When my mother suggested I deserved another chance at happiness, I refused. When coworkers invited me on trips or social outings, I usually refused. My life became simple. Work, home, Lauren, repeat. Years passed. Lauren grew into a remarkable young woman. She excelled in school and earned admission to Ohio State University. I still remember standing in her empty bedroom after helping her move into her dorm. I sat on her bed and cried. Not because I was sad, because I was proud. Everything I had sacrificed suddenly felt worth it. I thought the hardest years were behind us. I was wrong. College was expensive. Much more expensive than I had anticipated. I took extra shifts, sold jewelry that Michael had given me, used most of my savings. There were months when I barely bought anything for myself. My shoes wore out, my car needed repairs, my refrigerator was nearly empty, but Lauren never knew. And honestly, I didn't want her to know. A parent isn't supposed to hand their burdens to their child. At least that's what I believed. When Lauren graduated, I was sitting in the front row. I cried through most of the ceremony. The woman next to me probably thought I was losing my mind. But every diploma represented thousands of sacrifices nobody else had seen. Late night shifts, missed holidays, lonely evenings. All of it had led to that moment. After graduation, Lauren found a marketing job in Cincinnati. Her career took off quickly. Within a few years, she was earning more money than I had ever made. I was proud of that, too. She deserved success. When she married Ethan Mitchell, I welcomed him into the family immediately. Ethan was kind, respectful, steady, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. I liked him from the beginning, and when their son, Noah, was born, my heart expanded all over again. Being a grandmother felt like receiving a second chance at joy. I babysat whenever they needed help. I drove Noah to school, attended his baseball games, picked him up when Lauren was busy. Sometimes I wondered if I was becoming too available, too eager, too willing, but I never questioned it for long. Family helps family. That was how I had been raised. Then little changes started appearing, small enough to ignore at first. Lauren became harder to reach. Phone calls were shorter. Visits became less frequent. Conversations felt rushed. Whenever I talked about my life, she seemed distracted. Whenever she talked about hers, she expected my complete attention. At first, I blamed adulthood. People get busy. Careers become demanding. Families grow complicated. I understood that. I had lived it myself. But over time, something deeper began bothering me. It wasn't just that Lauren had less time for me. It felt like she had less interest in me. There is a difference. One afternoon, I spent nearly an hour telling her about a difficult patient I had cared for. When I finished, she looked up from her phone and said, "Sorry, Mom. What were you saying?" It sounds like a small thing. Maybe it was. But moments like that started happening more often. Another time, I invited her over for dinner. She canceled 30 minutes before arriving. Then I saw photos online of her having drinks with friends that same evening. Again, I told myself not to overreact. Again, I made excuses for her. Again, I chose understanding. That's what mothers do. At least that's what I kept telling myself. Then came my 67th birthday. Lauren forgot, not completely. She remembered 3 days later. She called while driving somewhere and said, "Oh my God, Mom, I'm so sorry. Things have just been crazy." I laughed and told her it was fine, but after we hung up, I sat alone in my kitchen staring at the birthday cake Patricia Collins had brought over. One forgotten birthday shouldn't matter. Yet somehow it did, because it wasn't about the date. It was about feeling invisible. That feeling stayed with me. Not every day, not every week, but often enough that I couldn't ignore it anymore. By the time retirement approached, I found myself hoping it would bring Lauren and me closer again. I imagined family dinners, weekend visits, long conversations. I imagined finally having time to enjoy the people I had spent decades working for. Especially my daughter. I had no idea that retirement would reveal truths I had spent years refusing to see. I certainly had no idea that the person who would break my heart wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a dishonest patient. It wasn't a difficult coworker. It wasn't even life itself. It would be the little girl I had spent 42 years loving more than myself. And the worst part? At that moment, I still believed she loved me just as much. As retirement approached, I found myself thinking less about the future and more about the past. Maybe that's what happens when you reach the end of a long career. You stop measuring life by what you're building and start measuring it by what you've built. For me, that meant looking back on 42 years as a nurse and 42 years as a mother. Both roles had shaped me, both had exhausted me, and both had given my life meaning. A month before my retirement party, Patricia Collins sat across from me at my kitchen table drinking coffee. Patricia had been my closest friend for over 30 years. She had seen me through grief, financial struggles, health scares, and every stage of motherhood. If anyone knew my heart, it was Patricia. "You seem distracted," she said. I smiled. Just thinking. Dangerous hobby? I laughed. I want to do something special for Lauren. Patricia raised an eyebrow. For your retirement. I nodded. Not exactly. She waited. I stared out the kitchen window. You know what I realized recently? What? Lauren doesn't know my story. Patricia looked confused. Of course she does. No, I said quietly. She knows facts, not the story. The difference mattered. Lauren knew I worked as a nurse. She knew I raised her alone. She knew life had been difficult after Michael died. But knowing facts isn't the same as understanding sacrifice. She had never truly seen the countless choices that shaped her life. The opportunities she received often looked effortless from her perspective. She never saw the cost. And honestly, that wasn't her fault. I had hidden the cost. I wanted her childhood to feel secure. I wanted her future to feel possible. I never wanted her carrying the burden of my struggles, but now, as retirement approached, I felt a growing need to share those memories. Not because I wanted praise, not because I wanted sympathy, because I wanted connection. I wanted my daughter to understand who I was beyond the role of mom. That conversation planted the seed for an idea. A few days later, I drove to a craft store, then another, then a small specialty shop downtown. Over the next several weeks, I quietly gathered supplies. Wood, decorative paper, photographs, envelopes, ribbons, boxes. The project consumed nearly every free evening, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely excited about something. The centerpiece would be a handcrafted memory box. Not something expensive, not something flashy, something meaningful. At least meaningful to me. I started with photographs. Hundreds of them. Some were stored in albums. Others were tucked inside drawers and closets. A few had been hidden inside books for years. I spread them across my dining room table. Pictures of Lauren as a baby. Lauren learning to ride a bicycle. Lauren dressed as a princess for Halloween. Lauren holding her first report card. Lauren on graduation day. Lauren holding newborn Noah. Every photograph carried a story. Every story carried a sacrifice. As I sorted through them, memories flooded back. I remembered sleeping in hospital break rooms because I couldn't afford childcare on certain nights. I remembered eating peanut butter sandwiches for weeks so Lauren could attend a school field trip. I remembered crying in my car after paying tuition bills because I wasn't sure how I would cover my mortgage. But I never regretted those choices. Not once. Because every difficult moment had been connected to something beautiful. My daughter. The photographs weren't enough, though. I wanted Lauren to hear my voice. Not literally, emotionally. So I began writing letters. Some were only a page long. Others stretched across several pages. Letters about her childhood. Letters about Michael. Letters about the dreams I had for her. Letters about the fears I never shared. Letters about the pride I felt watching her become a mother. One evening, I wrote until nearly midnight. When I finished, tears covered the paper. I sat alone in my living room, holding that letter. For a moment, I considered throwing it away. It felt too personal, too vulnerable. But then I thought about all the years Lauren and I had spent talking about schedules, responsibilities, and practical things. Maybe vulnerability was exactly what had been missing. So I kept writing. By the end of the month, the box contained more than 20 letters. Then I added another layer. Old keepsakes. A hospital badge from my first nursing job. A newspaper clipping from Lauren's academic awards. A tiny ballet slipper from her childhood dance classes. A ticket stub from our only mother-daughter vacation. Small objects, huge memories. Each item represented a chapter of our lives together. Yet there was one final piece I hadn't shown anyone, not even Patricia. The key. a small brass key attached to a silver chain. Simple, ordinary, easy to overlook. But its meaning was enormous. Years earlier, after finally paying off my mortgage, I had purchased a modest cabin near a lake in northern Ohio. It wasn't luxurious. It wasn't worth millions, but it was beautiful, peaceful, private, the kind of place where families gathered, the kind of place where grandchildren created memories. For years, I had quietly maintained it, paid the taxes, handled repairs, improved the property, and eventually, I had made a decision. One day, the cabin would belong to Lauren. I never told her, not because it was a secret, because I wanted the moment to feel special. The key inside the memory box symbolized that future. It represented trust, legacy, family, everything I hoped to leave behind. As retirement day approached, my excitement grew, maybe more than it should have. I imagined Lauren opening the box, seeing the photographs, reading the letters, understanding perhaps for the first time everything that had gone into building her life. I imagined tears, laughter, hugs. Maybe we'd spend the evening talking about memories. Maybe we'd finally reconnect. Maybe we'd become close again. The closer the party came, the more I allowed myself to believe those possibilities. A week before retirement, Lauren called. She sounded distracted, busy, like always. "Mom, what do you want as a retirement gift?" she asked. I smiled. "I don't need anything. Come on." "No, really," she sighed. "You always say that." Because it was true. I never needed expensive gifts. I never needed luxury. What I wanted couldn't be purchased. I wanted time, connection, love, respect, the things money couldn't guarantee. After we hung up, I looked at the memory box sitting on my dining room table. Finished, ready, waiting. The wood gleamed under the light. The letters were neatly arranged. The photographs were organized chronologically. The brass key rested inside a velvet pouch. Everything was perfect. Or so I thought. What I didn't know was that Lauren was expecting something entirely different from my retirement celebration. Something larger, something more valuable, something measured in dollars rather than memories. And when the moment finally arrived, the difference between what I gave and what she wanted would change everything. The morning of my retirement party felt strangely emotional. I had imagined that day for years. 42 years of 12-hour shifts. 42 years of holidays spent inside hospital walls. 42 years of comforting strangers while quietly carrying my own pain. And now it was over. For the first time since I was 25 years old, I had nowhere I needed to be the following Monday. No alarm clock, no patient charts, no emergency calls, just freedom. At least that was what everyone kept calling it. Freedom. Yet, as I stood in front of my bathroom mirror that morning, adjusting my pearl earrings, freedom wasn't what I felt. I felt nervous, like a teenager preparing for her first date. The retirement party itself wasn't making me anxious. The memory box was. For weeks I had imagined Lauren's reaction. Maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe expectations are dangerous things. The bigger they become, the harder they fall. But I couldn't help it. I loved my daughter. And somewhere deep inside me still lived the little hope that she would finally understand everything I had never said out loud. The party was held in a private room at a restaurant overlooking the Scioto River in Columbus. Several former coworkers attended, a few neighbors, some family members. Patricia arrived early to help. When she saw me carrying the memory box, she smiled. "There it is." I nodded. "There it is." She placed a hand on my shoulder. "She's going to love it." I smiled. "I hope so." Even now, looking back, those words hurt. I hope so, because I truly did. The memory box sat beside my chair throughout the evening, wrapped carefully in cream-colored paper, a silver ribbon tied around it. Nothing extravagant, just elegant, meaningful, personal. Exactly the kind of gift I believed mattered most. The evening started beautifully. My former nursing supervisor gave a speech. Several coworkers shared stories. People laughed. People cried. I even cried a little myself. When they presented me with a plaque honoring my years of service, everyone stood and applauded. For a few moments, I felt seen, appreciated, valued, not as someone's mother, not as someone's widow, but as Monica Dunn. A woman who had dedicated her life to caring for others. It was one of the happiest moments I'd experienced in years. Then Lauren arrived. She wasn't late, but she wasn't early either. She walked in carrying an expensive handbag and talking on her phone. Ethan followed behind her. Noah came in after them. As always, Ethan immediately greeted everyone. Noah ran over and hugged me, but Lauren remained distracted. "Sorry," she said while ending her call. "Work has been insane," I smiled. "It's okay." Because that's what mothers say. It's okay, even when it isn't. Throughout dinner, Lauren checked her phone repeatedly. I tried not to notice. I tried not to let it bother me. People have busy lives. People have responsibilities. Still, each glance at her screen felt like a reminder that something else mattered more than the moment we were sharing. After dessert, Patricia stood and raised her glass. "I think Monica deserves one more celebration tonight." The room cheered. Patricia pointed toward the gift. "Open yours." My heart immediately started racing. This was it, the moment, the reason I had spent weeks writing letters and gathering memories. I carefully lifted the wrapped box. "Lauren," I said softly, "this is for you." She looked surprised. "For me?" I nodded. "Yes." The room grew quiet. Everyone watched. Lauren smiled politely and accepted the package. For a second, I felt hopeful again. Maybe this would be exactly what I had imagined. Maybe we both needed this. Lauren untied the ribbon, removed the wrapping paper, opened the wooden lid. The first thing she saw was a photograph. A picture of her at 6 years old, missing front teeth, holding a stuffed rabbit, one of my favorite pictures. She stared at it briefly, then picked up one of the letters, then another, then another. Her expression began changing. Not into emotion, not into gratitude, into confusion, then impatience. The room remained silent, waiting, watching. I watched too. My smile slowly faded. Lauren flipped through several photographs, looked at the velvet pouch, opened it, examined the brass key. Then she looked at me and rolled her eyes. Actually rolled her eyes. For a second, I thought I must have imagined it. Surely I had misunderstood. Surely my own daughter wouldn't react that way. Not here. Not now. Not after everything. But then she laughed softly. Not a joyful laugh, a dismissive one. And she said the words I will never forget. "Mom, this is just a box of old stuff." Silence. Absolute silence. You could have heard a fork drop. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Patricia stared at Lauren. Ethan's face immediately tightened. Even Noah looked uncomfortable. My heart sank so quickly it felt physical, like falling through ice. I looked down at the photographs inside the box. The photographs I had spent hours organizing. The letters that contained pieces of my soul. The memories I had protected for decades. Old stuff. That was what she saw. Old stuff. I forced myself to smile. Because what else could I do? Cry, argue, beg her to understand, no. I simply smiled. "Oh," I said. Maybe it means more to me than it does to you. Lauren shrugged. I mean, it's nice, it's just… She hesitated, then laughed again. I don't know. I thought it was something else. Something else. Those two words echoed inside my head. Something else. The cabin key suddenly made sense. The confusion on her face suddenly made sense. She hadn't expected memories. She had expected value. Financial value. Something tangible. Something expensive. Something that could be measured. And the realization hit me like a punch to the chest. While I had spent weeks preparing a gift filled with love, Lauren had apparently spent weeks expecting something worth money. Ethan quickly stepped in. He picked up one of the letters. This is actually incredible, he said. His voice sounded sincere, very sincere. You made all of this yourself, I nodded. It must have taken forever. It did. Patricia spoke next. I think it's beautiful. Others quickly agreed. The atmosphere slowly recovered. People resumed talking. The evening moved forward. But something fundamental had changed. Not publicly, internally, inside me. A crack had appeared, a painful one, and no amount of polite conversation could repair it. The rest of the party passed in a blur. I smiled, thanked people, posed for photographs, accepted hugs, played the role everyone expected, but behind every smile lived the same question. Why? Why had Lauren reacted that way? What had happened to the little girl who once treasured handwritten notes and family traditions? When had memories become worthless to her? When had I become someone she merely tolerated? Eventually, the party ended. Guests began leaving. Goodbyes were exchanged. Hugs were given. The room slowly emptied. And as I prepared to leave, I still believed the worst part of the night was over. I thought the humiliation of that moment would be the deepest wound. I was wrong. Because later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I would accidentally hear a conversation that would reveal something far more painful than a rolled eye. Something that would force me to question everything I thought I knew about my daughter. The retirement party officially ended around 9 o'clock. By then, most of the guests had already gone home. The restaurant staff were clearing tables. Patricia had hugged me 3 separate times before finally leaving. Even Noah had wrapped his arms around me and whispered, I like the box, Grandma. Those 6 words meant more to me than he could possibly understand. Unfortunately, they couldn't erase what had happened. The drive home should have felt peaceful. Instead, I replayed Lauren's reaction over and over in my mind. The eye roll, the laugh, the disappointment, the phrase, just a box of old stuff. Every time I remembered it, another small piece of my heart cracked. Still, I kept trying to defend her. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Mothers are remarkably talented at creating excuses for their children, even when those children are 42 years old. I arrived home shortly after 10, exhausted, emotionally drained, ready to put the entire evening behind me. I changed into comfortable clothes and began unpacking a few gifts people had given me. A coffee mug, some books, gift cards, flowers, normal retirement gifts. As I was putting everything away, my phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. You okay? I stared at the message for a few seconds. Then I typed back. I'm fine. The lie appeared on the screen. I almost deleted it. Instead, I pressed send. Because admitting the truth would have made it real, and I wasn't ready for that yet. About 15 minutes later, I realized something. My purse wasn't in the house. I checked the kitchen, the bedroom, the living room. Nothing. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. I had left it at the restaurant. Fortunately, the restaurant was only about 15 minutes away. I grabbed my keys and headed back. The parking lot was nearly empty when I arrived. Most of the lights inside had already been dimmed. A young employee recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Dunn!" "Yes." "You left a purse." Relief washed over me. "Thank goodness." The employee smiled. "We put it in the private room." I thanked him and walked down the hallway. The room where the party had been held was mostly dark. Only a few lights remained on. As I approached the doorway, I heard voices. Familiar voices. Lauren and Ethan. I stopped without meaning to. Not because I wanted to eavesdrop, because I recognized my daughter's voice instantly. The door was partially open. They hadn't seen me. At first I intended to walk in. Then I heard Lauren say something that made me freeze. I seriously thought she was finally going to tell me about the cabin. My heart skipped. The cabin. The key. I remained still. Ethan sighed. "Lauren." "What? Did you really expect your mom to announce an inheritance at her retirement party?" Lauren laughed. A short, irritated laugh. "Not announce it, but come on, Ethan." There was a pause. Then she continued. "She knows everything is going to me eventually anyway." Everything. The word landed heavily in my chest. I stood motionless outside the room, barely breathing. Ethan sounded uncomfortable. "You shouldn't talk about it like that." "I'm being realistic." "No." His voice became firmer. "You're being entitled." Silence. For a moment I felt grateful. At least someone in that room understood how inappropriate the conversation was. Then Lauren spoke again. "You don't get it." "Then explain it." Another pause. "I've spent years helping her." I nearly laughed out loud. Helping me. What exactly had she helped with the birthday? She forgot. The surgery she barely visited me during the phone calls she rushed through. But I stayed silent, listening. "She's getting older," Lauren continued. "At some point, she's going to need help managing everything." Ethan sighed again. "That's not what tonight was about." "Maybe not." "Then why are you upset?" The answer came immediately. Because I thought she was finally getting practical. Practical. I felt physically ill. My retirement celebration, the memory box, the letters, the photographs, my entire heart. And Lauren's concern was practicality, money, property, assets, not memories, not family, not love. I leaned against the wall, suddenly feeling older than I had all evening. Ethan spoke quietly. "You hurt her." "No, I didn't." "Lauren, I didn't." You rolled your eyes. I was disappointed. The honesty of that statement shocked me. Not because she admitted it, because she saw nothing wrong with it. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't apologetic. She believed disappointment justified her behavior. Then came the sentence that changed everything. The sentence I would replay in my head for weeks. The sentence that destroyed every excuse I had been making for her. Lauren said, "Honestly, she should just start transferring things now instead of waiting." Silence. Complete silence. I felt as though all the air had disappeared from the hallway. Ethan didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded stunned. "She's your mother." "I know. Do you hear yourself?" Lauren groaned. "Oh, stop acting like I'm talking about stealing from her." "Then what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about planning." Planning. The word sounded absurd. Cold. Calculated. Then she lowered her voice, but not enough. "I mean, eventually the house, the investments, the cabin, it's all coming to us anyway." Us. Not her mother, not family memories, not emotional connections, assets, numbers, property, things. For the first time all night, I stopped making excuses. I stopped blaming stress. I stopped blaming work. I stopped blaming misunderstanding. Because misunderstanding wasn't the problem. Lauren had understood perfectly. She simply valued different things than I did. The realization hurt more than the eye roll ever could. Far more. I quietly stepped backward, careful not to make a sound. I no longer cared about my purse. I no longer cared about anything inside that room. The conversation had already given me something much more important. The truth. The painful, undeniable truth. A few moments later, I returned to the front desk. The employee retrieved my purse for me. I thanked him, walked outside, got into my car, and sat there, alone. The parking lot was nearly empty. The city lights reflected against my windshield. For several minutes, I simply stared ahead. Not crying, not yet, just thinking. 42 years. 42 years of sacrifice. 42 years of putting my daughter first. And somehow, somewhere along the way, she had stopped seeing me as a person. Perhaps she still loved me. I honestly didn't know, but she certainly viewed my future through the lens of her inheritance. That much was clear. When the tears finally came, they came quietly, one after another. Not dramatic, not loud, just heartbreaking. Because the greatest grief wasn't losing money, it wasn't losing property, it wasn't even losing respect. It was realizing that someone you loved unconditionally might be calculating your value differently than you imagined. Eventually, I started the car. As I drove home, one thought repeated itself over and over. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was awake, and for the first time in years, I knew I needed answers. More importantly, I needed to protect myself. The next morning, I would make a phone call to someone I hadn't needed professionally in a very long time. My attorney, Daniel Harper, and that conversation would begin changing everything. I called Daniel Harper the next morning at exactly 9 o'clock. Not because I was eager, not because I was angry, because I couldn't stop thinking. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Lauren's voice again. Everything is going to me eventually anyway. By sunrise, I knew I needed clarity, not revenge. Clarity. Daniel Harper had been my attorney for nearly 20 years. He wasn't just competent. He was careful, methodical, the kind of man who never rushed a decision. When his receptionist answered, I asked whether he had time for a meeting. Apparently he did. 2 hours later, I was sitting across from him in his downtown Columbus office. Daniel looked exactly as he always had. Gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, perfectly organized desk. The only difference was that we both looked older. Life has a way of doing that. Monica, he said warmly. It's been a while. It has. He smiled. Retirement treating you well. I laughed softly. Not exactly. His expression changed immediately. What happened? For a moment, I considered telling him everything. Then I hesitated, because saying something aloud often makes it real. And I wasn't sure I was ready for reality. Unfortunately, reality didn't care about my readiness. So I told him. All of it. The memory box. The eye roll. The conversation outside the restaurant. The cabin. The inheritance comments. Everything. Daniel listened without interrupting. When I finished, he remained silent for several seconds. Not because he was surprised, because he was thinking. Finally, he folded his hands. What would you like to do? The question caught me off guard. I don't know. He nodded. That's fair. I don't want to overreact. Then don't. I appreciated that answer. Most people immediately choose sides. Daniel never did. He preferred facts. Facts were safer. Facts were cleaner. Facts hurt less than emotions. At least sometimes. I took a deep breath. I think I need to review everything. Everything. My estate plan. Daniel leaned back. That's easy enough. He opened a file drawer, pulled out a thick folder, and placed it on the desk. Seeing my entire estate summarized inside a folder felt strange. A lifetime reduced to paperwork. The house. The investment accounts. Retirement funds. insurance policies, the lake cabin, everything. Daniel opened the file. There haven't been any major changes in years. I nodded, because there hadn't been. For most of my adult life, my estate plan had been simple. If something happened to me, everything went to Lauren. Not almost everything. Everything. The house, the cabin, the accounts, the investments, all of it. At the time, the arrangement seemed obvious. Lauren was my only child. Who else would inherit? Daniel reviewed the documents one by one. I stared at the pages. Each signature represented trust. Trust that my daughter would eventually honor the sacrifices that created those assets. Trust that she valued me as much as I valued her. Trust that family meant something beyond money. The trust suddenly felt fragile. Daniel eventually looked up. Your current plan leaves approximately 95% of your estate to Lauren. I nodded. The number didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how uncomfortable it suddenly made me feel. Do you want to change that? I hesitated. No. Then I paused. Maybe. Daniel waited, patiently. I don't know what I want yet. That's okay. The kindness in his voice nearly made me cry. Because for the first time since the party, someone wasn't asking me to make an immediate decision. He was allowing me to think. Then something unexpected happened. Daniel reached for another file, a much thinner one. There's something else you should know. My stomach tightened. What? He adjusted his glasses. About 6 months ago, Lauren contacted my office. The room suddenly felt smaller. She did? Yes. I stared at him. Why? Daniel chose his words carefully. She said she wanted to help you organize your affairs. Organize your affairs? The phrase sounded familiar. Too familiar. I remembered hearing similar language from Lauren before. Casual comments, questions, conversations I had barely noticed at the time. What exactly did she ask? Daniel opened the file. General questions, such as whether your estate documents were current. I said nothing. Whether you had updated beneficiary information. Still, nothing. Whether ownership of the cabin had been transferred. That one hit hard, very hard. The cabin, again, always the cabin. Daniel continued. I didn't provide details, obviously. Of course. Without your authorization, I couldn't. I appreciated his professionalism. Yet, the damage was already done, because the questions themselves revealed something. Lauren hadn't suddenly become interested in my finances after retirement. She had been interested for months, maybe longer. The realization settled heavily in my chest. Daniel closed the file. I didn't think much of it at the time. But now, he sighed, now I think context matters. I nodded slowly, because context changed everything. A concerned daughter asking about her mother's affairs is one thing. A daughter discussing future assets while expressing disappointment about inheritance expectations is something else entirely. The difference was enormous. I stood and walked toward the office window. Outside, people moved through downtown Columbus. Normal lives, normal problems. Meanwhile, my world felt increasingly complicated. After a long silence, I turned back toward Daniel. Am I being unfair? The question surprised even me. But I needed an honest answer. Daniel considered it carefully. No. You don't think so? No. Why? His answer was simple. Because you're asking questions before making decisions. That sentence stayed with me. Questions before decisions, reason before reaction. Maybe that was exactly what I needed. Not revenge, not punishment. Understanding, protection, boundaries, the things I had neglected for decades. I returned to my seat. Daniel studied me. Monica, can I offer some advice? Please. For 42 years, you've been taking care of everyone else. I smiled sadly. That's what nurses do. Yes, he paused. But you are retired now. I looked at him. For the first time in a very long time, you need to ask yourself a different question. What question? His voice became softer. What do you want? Not what Lauren wanted, not what Ethan wanted, not what society expected, what I wanted. The truth was, I didn't know. I had spent so many years putting other people first that the question felt foreign, uncomfortable, almost selfish. Yet as I sat there, another realization slowly emerged. I wasn't upset because Lauren wanted money. Money wasn't the real issue. I was upset because she seemed to value the money more than she valued me. That was the wound. That was the betrayal. Daniel eventually closed the file. We don't need to change anything today. Relief washed over me. Thank you. But I do think you should take time to evaluate your options. I nodded. I will. And Monica? Yes. Protect yourself emotionally before you protect your assets. I stared at him. That might have been the wisest thing anyone had said to me all year, because the truth was simple. My heart had been vulnerable long before my estate was. When I left Daniel's office that afternoon, I wasn't carrying new paperwork. I wasn't carrying a revised will. I wasn't carrying a plan for revenge. I was carrying something much more important: awareness. For the first time, I could see the situation clearly. And once you truly see something, it's impossible to unsee it. What I didn't realize yet was that someone else would soon show me a very different kind of relationship. A relationship built not on expectation but gratitude. Not on entitlement, but kindness. And her name was Grace Walker. After meeting with Daniel Harper, I spent several days trying to clear my head. I walked more, read more, spent less time staring at my phone waiting for Lauren to call. It wasn't easy. For years, my schedule had revolved around other people: patients, doctors, coworkers, family. Now retirement had given me something unfamiliar: time. And time can be dangerous when your heart is hurting. It gives your thoughts room to wander. Mine wandered constantly. Back to the restaurant. Back to Lauren. Back to the painful realization that perhaps I had spent years ignoring signs I didn't want to see. One rainy Thursday afternoon, I was cleaning out a closet when I found an old hospital bracelet. The sight of it immediately transported me 2 years into the past, back to one of the most difficult periods of my life. A period I hadn't thought about much lately. A period that introduced me to Grace Walker. At the time, I was 65, still working full-time, still believing I was indestructible. Then my body disagreed. A routine medical exam revealed a condition that required surgery. Nothing life-threatening, but serious enough to require hospitalization and several weeks of recovery. For someone who had spent 4 decades taking care of patients, becoming one felt strange. I hated it. I hated the loss of independence. I hated asking for help. I hated lying in bed while other people cared for me. The first night after surgery was especially difficult. Pain medication made me groggy. The room felt cold. The machines beeped constantly. And despite being surrounded by medical professionals, I felt profoundly alone. Lauren visited briefly that afternoon. About 20 minutes, maybe 30. She brought flowers. Checked her phone repeatedly. Told me she had meetings. Then left. At the time, I didn't blame her. She had a career, a family, responsibilities. At least that was what I told myself. The next day, she didn't come. The day after that, she stayed for 15 minutes. The following day, she sent a text. No visit. Again, I made excuses. Again, I chose understanding. But the truth was that I noticed. Of course I noticed. People always notice who shows up when they're vulnerable. One evening around 9 o'clock, A young nurse entered my room carrying a cup of tea. I remember her clearly. Dark brown hair pulled into a ponytail, tired eyes, kind smile. She couldn't have been more than 29. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. I smiled weakly. "Is it that obvious?" "A little." She handed me the tea. "Chamomile, thank you." Most nurses would have left after that, not because they were uncaring, because they were busy. Hospitals never stop moving. But she stayed, just for a few minutes, long enough to ask how I was doing, long enough to listen, long enough to make me feel like a person instead of a patient. That was Grace Walker. At the time, I assumed she was simply exceptionally good at her job. Later, I realized kindness was simply part of who she was. Over the next several days, Grace became one of my primary nurses. Every shift she worked, she checked on me a little more often than necessary. Not in an intrusive way. In a human way. She remembered details, asked about my grandson, asked about retirement plans, asked about my late husband. She listened when I answered, really listened. One evening, she noticed me staring at a family photograph. "Your daughter?" she asked. I smiled. "Yes." "She's beautiful." "She is." Grace nodded. "You look proud." "I am." That answer came easily, because despite everything, I was proud of Lauren. I always would be. Grace sat briefly beside the bed. "My mom died when I was 12. The statement surprised me. I looked at her. She shrugged slightly. "Car accident." The coincidence hit me immediately. Michael had died in a car accident too. For several minutes, we talked, not nurse and patient. Two women who understood loss. By the end of the conversation, I felt strangely connected to her, as though we had skipped past small talk and landed somewhere real. During my recovery, those conversations continued. Nothing dramatic, nothing life-changing, just honest. Grace told me about nursing school, student loans, working extra shifts, trying to build a future. I told her about Lauren, about raising a child alone, about the sacrifices that come with motherhood. Sometimes we laughed, sometimes we shared stories. Sometimes we simply sat quietly, and somehow, during one of the most difficult periods of my life, Grace made the hospital feel less lonely. The contrast between Grace and Lauren didn't fully register until later. At the time, I wasn't comparing them. I wasn't keeping score. I wasn't looking for evidence. I was simply grateful. After my discharge, Grace and I occasionally stayed in touch. Nothing unusual. An occasional holiday card, a text message, updates about life. The sort of relationship that develops naturally when people genuinely care about each other. Then something unexpected happened. About a year later, Grace invited me to coffee. She looked nervous the entire time. Finally, she admitted why. She was struggling financially, not because she was irresponsible, because life had become expensive. Her father was sick, medical bills were growing. Student debt remained overwhelming, and she was considering dropping out of an advanced nursing certification program she desperately wanted to complete. The sadness in her voice reminded me of someone, my younger self. The woman who had once worked endless overtime to create opportunities for Lauren. When coffee ended, I went home and thought about our conversation. For days. Then I made a decision, a private decision, one nobody knew about. Not even Grace. I contacted the certification program, paid the remaining tuition balance anonymously, every penny. I never expected Grace to find out. I certainly didn't want recognition. Helping people had been my entire career. This felt natural, simple, right. 3 months later, Grace somehow learned the truth. I still don't know how. But she called me crying. Actually crying. "Why would you do that?" she asked. I laughed. "Because someone helped me once." "No." Her voice broke. "You didn't have to." She repeated those words several times. "You didn't have to." The phrase stayed with me because gratitude sounds different from entitlement, very different. Lauren often spoke as though support was expected. Grace spoke as though kindness was a miracle. The difference mattered, more than I realized at the time. Standing in my closet 2 years later, holding that hospital bracelet, I suddenly understood why the memory felt so powerful. It wasn't really about the surgery, or the recovery, or even the friendship. It was about perspective. Grace had never asked me for anything, never expected anything, never viewed me as an opportunity. She simply appreciated me as a person. And after everything that had happened with Lauren, that realization felt impossible to ignore. For the first time, I found myself wondering a question I had never dared ask before. What if family isn't defined solely by blood? What if the people who value your heart deserve more consideration than the people who merely expect your assets? The thought made me uncomfortable, but it also made me think. And the more I thought about it, the harder it became to dismiss. Because while Lauren seemed increasingly interested in my estate, Grace had always been interested in me, and soon, another series of events would make that difference impossible to overlook. After my meeting with Daniel and my reflections about Grace, I promised myself something. I would stop jumping to conclusions. I would stop assuming the worst. And most importantly, I would give Lauren every opportunity to prove that I was wrong. A part of me desperately wanted to be wrong. What mother wants to believe her child sees her as an inheritance instead of a person, not me? Not after 42 years of loving that child. So, I decided to observe instead of react. I wouldn't accuse. I wouldn't confront. I wouldn't mention the restaurant conversation. I would simply pay attention. Sometimes the truth reveals itself when you stop looking away. The first sign appeared less than a week later. Lauren called me on a Tuesday afternoon. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the length of the call. Normally, our conversations lasted 5 or 10 minutes. This one lasted nearly 40. At first, I felt hopeful. Maybe she missed me. Maybe she wanted to reconnect. Maybe I had misjudged everything. We talked about Noah's baseball season, the weather, retirement, my garden, normal things. Then the conversation shifted, subtly, almost invisibly. "So," Lauren said casually, "have you figured out what you're doing with all your retirement accounts?" I paused. The question felt innocent enough, but after everything that had happened, I noticed it immediately. "Not really. You should probably organize everything." "I will." Another pause. "What about the cabin?" There it was, the cabin again. I forced myself to sound relaxed. "What about it?" "Oh, nothing." Her voice remained light, too light. "I was just curious." Curious. I remembered Daniel's file, the questions, the inquiries months earlier. Curious seemed to be Lauren's favorite word. We ended the call shortly afterward. When I set my phone down, a strange feeling settled over me. Not anger, confirmation. A tiny piece of confirmation. One small conversation meant nothing, but patterns meant something, and a pattern was beginning to emerge. Over the next 2 weeks, the calls continued, more frequently than ever before, every few days, sometimes every day. At first glance, it looked like concern, a daughter checking on her retired mother. Anyone watching from the outside might have found it touching. I almost did. Until I started paying attention to what she actually asked. Questions about my health, then questions about insurance, questions about my home, questions about my investments, questions about legal paperwork, questions about taxes, questions about the cabin. Always the cabin. The subjects kept returning, like a compass needle finding north. One afternoon, she called while I was shopping. "Mom, have you ever thought about putting someone's name on your accounts for convenience?" The question stopped me in the middle of a grocery aisle. "For convenience?" "Yeah," she laughed. "You know, in case something happens. Something happens. Another innocent phrase, another loaded phrase. I looked at a shelf full of cereal boxes while considering my answer. I haven't really thought about it. You should. Why? Because it would make things easier. Easier for whom? I didn't ask the question aloud. I already knew the answer. That night I mentioned the conversation to Patricia. We were eating dinner at my house. She listened quietly, then set down her fork. Monica? What? You're seeing it now, aren't you? I sighed. Maybe? No. Her voice was gentle. You're seeing it. Patricia had never disliked Lauren. In fact, she had always been supportive, which made her opinion harder to dismiss. I don't want to believe it. I know. The sadness in her voice hurt. Because she wasn't trying to convince me. She was watching me catch up to something she had already noticed. A few days later, another incident occurred, one that made denial nearly impossible. Lauren invited herself over on Saturday morning. Again, unusual. She rarely had time before retirement. Now she suddenly seemed available. She arrived carrying coffee and pastries, friendly, warm, attentive. The version of Lauren I hadn't seen in years. For a brief moment, I almost felt guilty for doubting her. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I had allowed one painful conversation to distort everything. Then we sat down in the living room, and within 20 minutes, she brought up paperwork. Again. I could help organize your files. I smiled. That's sweet. It makes sense. I've managed them so far. Sure, she laughed, but there's a lot. Then her eyes drifted toward my desk, the filing cabinet beside it. The cabinet containing financial records, legal documents, property information. The glance lasted only a second, but I noticed it, because now I was paying attention, very close attention. Later that afternoon, after Lauren left, I opened the filing cabinet. Everything appeared untouched. Yet I felt strangely protective. Not because of the documents themselves, because of what they represented. Independence, control, choice. For decades, I had given freely. Money, time, energy, support. And now, for the first time in my life, I was questioning whether anyone had mistaken generosity for obligation. The following week brought another surprise, a text message, a very specific one. Lauren, do you still have the original deed for the cabin? I stared at my phone, read the message twice, then 3 times. Not because it was complicated, because it was impossible to misunderstand. I typed slowly. Why? Her reply came immediately. Just curious. Curious. Again, the same word, the same pattern, the same focus. At that moment, something shifted inside me. Not dramatically, not angrily, quietly, the way ice begins melting before anyone notices. I realized I was no longer waiting for proof. The proof was accumulating on its own. Question after question. Conversation after conversation. Topic after topic. Always leading back to assets. Always leading back to ownership. Always leading back to what would eventually become hers, or what she believed would become hers. That evening, I created a folder on my laptop. Nothing elaborate, just a simple folder. Inside it, I saved screenshots of text messages, dates, conversations, notes, not because I planned to use them, because I wanted a record, something objective, something factual. Daniel's voice echoed in my mind. Questions before decisions, facts before conclusions. So, I collected facts, more for my own peace of mind than anything else. A few days later, I received another call. This time, Lauren sounded unusually enthusiastic. Mom, I have an idea. I immediately felt uneasy. What kind of idea? We should get together and go through all your paperwork. There it was, direct, no longer hidden beneath casual questions. No rush, she added quickly. But it would be smart. Smart, practical, convenient, efficient. The vocabulary kept changing. The destination never did. For the first time, I decided not to pretend. Not completely. I appreciate the offer. A brief silence. Then she asked, "But," I smiled sadly. "But I think I'm okay." The silence became longer, noticeably longer. When she finally spoke again, her voice sounded different. Not angry, disappointed. The same disappointment I had heard when she opened the memory box. And that realization chilled me because it suggested something painful. Maybe the memory box hadn't been an isolated moment. Maybe it had simply been the first crack in a mask that was becoming harder for her to maintain. As the call ended, I found myself staring out my living room window. The sun was setting, the sky glowing orange and gold. Beautiful, peaceful. Yet I couldn't shake a growing sense of concern, because Lauren's questions were becoming more frequent, more direct, more focused. And deep down, I had the uncomfortable feeling that she wasn't finished. Not even close. Something bigger was coming. Something that would reveal just how far she was willing to go. The invitation arrived on a Thursday afternoon. A simple text message from Lauren. "Mom, let's do dinner Saturday. Just us and Ethan. We'd love to spend time with you." I stared at the screen longer than necessary. Under different circumstances, the message would have made me happy. A family dinner. Quality time. Connection. Everything I had hoped retirement might bring. But circumstances were no longer different. They were exactly what they were. And what they were made me cautious. Still, I accepted. Not because I trusted the situation, because I wanted to understand it. Saturday evening arrived with clear skies and warm weather. Lauren and Ethan lived in a beautiful suburban neighborhood outside Cincinnati. The kind of neighborhood with manicured lawns and expensive SUVs parked in every driveway. When I arrived, Ethan greeted me warmly, as always. "Good to see you, Monica." "You too." He hugged me, a genuine hug, not rushed, not distracted. One of the reasons I liked Ethan so much was that he never made me feel like an obligation. Lauren appeared moments later, smiling, friendly, almost unusually friendly. She kissed my cheek, asked how I was doing, offered me a drink. The entire evening felt strangely polished. Like everyone was following a script, especially Lauren. Dinner itself was pleasant, at first. We talked about Noah's upcoming school year, vacation plans, local news, the weather, safe topics, comfortable topics. Lauren laughed more than usual, complimented my outfit, asked questions about retirement. Anyone watching from the outside would have seen a loving family sharing a meal. But underneath the surface, I felt tension. Not visible tension, anticipation. Like everyone was waiting for something. About 45 minutes into dinner, I discovered what it was. Lauren stood and disappeared into another room. When she returned, she was carrying a large folder. My stomach immediately tightened. There it was. The thing I had been expecting. The thing I had been dreading. She sat down and placed the folder on the table, then smiled. "I wanted to talk to you about something." Of course she did. I glanced toward Ethan. His expression changed instantly, subtly, but noticeably, almost as if he knew what was coming and wasn't entirely comfortable with it. Lauren opened the folder. Inside were documents, several documents, neatly organized, prepared in advance. That detail mattered, because it meant this wasn't spontaneous. It was planned, carefully planned. "Mom," she began, "I've been thinking a lot about the future." The future. Always the future. I remained silent, listening. She continued. "I know you're healthy." "Thank you. I mean it." she smiled. But it's important to prepare for things. There was that word again. Prepare, plan, organize, practical. The vocabulary never changed much, only the packaging. Lauren slid a few pages toward me. I talked to someone who specializes in estate organization. Estate organization. Interesting. Very interesting. I glanced down. The documents looked professional, legal, complex. The kind of paperwork most people wouldn't fully understand at first glance. Fortunately, I wasn't most people. I had spent the previous weeks talking with Daniel Harper, and Daniel had taught me something important. Read everything, every word, every page, every clause. No exceptions. So I did. The room grew quiet as I slowly reviewed the first document, then the second, then the third. The deeper I read, the colder I felt. Because this wasn't estate organization. Not really. This was ownership transfer. Current ownership transfer. Not after my death. Now. The language was clear. Very clear. Property interests, shared ownership structures, asset management authority, beneficiary modifications. It wasn't outright theft. Nothing illegal. Nothing that obvious. But it absolutely shifted control away from me and toward Lauren. I kept reading. Lauren watched me closely. Too closely. Like a student waiting for exam results. Finally, I looked up. "What exactly is this?" Her smile flickered, only briefly. "Just paperwork." I almost laughed. Just paperwork. The phrase sounded ridiculous. Paperwork for what? She leaned forward. To make things easier later. Easier later. I set the pages down. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Ethan cleared his throat. The sound startled me. Because he sounded uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Lauren looked toward him. A warning glance. A quick one, but I caught it. And apparently Ethan did too. He looked away. Interesting. Very interesting. I turned back to Lauren. Why now? The question seemed simple, yet she struggled to answer it. Because it's smart. That's not an answer. Another pause, then she tried again. Because eventually we'll have to deal with these things. Eventually, there it was. The word that revealed everything. Eventually, the future she kept talking about. The future where my assets became hers. The future she seemed increasingly eager to organize. I folded my hands calmly. Years of nursing had taught me something valuable. People reveal more when you remain calm. Anger closes conversations. Silence opens them. So I stayed calm. Very calm. Lauren. Yes. Did Daniel Harper tell you to do this? The question landed harder than I expected. She froze, not dramatically, but noticeably. And that hesitation told me more than any answer could. No. Interesting, because Daniel certainly hadn't. I already knew that. Then another realization hit me. She didn't know I had met with Daniel. Not yet. And suddenly I understood why she looked nervous. She assumed I was uninformed, unprepared, easy to persuade. That realization hurt, far more than I expected, because it suggested she viewed me as vulnerable, not as her mother. As an obstacle requiring management. I glanced at the paperwork again, then closed the folder. I'm not signing anything. The sentence came out calmly, firmly, final. Lauren blinked. What? I'm not signing anything. The room became silent. Ethan stared at the table. Lauren stared at me. The friendly atmosphere disappeared instantly. Gone, like it had never existed. For the first time all evening, I saw frustration behind her smile. Raw frustration. Mom, you haven't even considered it. I considered it. You read it for 5 minutes. I read enough. Her jaw tightened. You're being stubborn. The accusation surprised me, not because it was harsh, because it arrived so quickly, almost as if she had expected resistance and prepared for it. I felt something inside me shift, another piece of denial breaking away. The old Monica would have apologized, explained herself, tried to keep the peace, but retirement had changed something, or perhaps the truth had. I'm being careful. There's a difference. Lauren leaned back in her chair, clearly irritated now. This would make everything easier, I nodded. For who? The question hung in the air, heavy, uncomfortable, dangerous. Lauren didn't answer immediately. Because she couldn't, not honestly. Ethan finally spoke, for the first time in several minutes. Maybe we should drop it. I looked at him, grateful. Lauren did not. Her expression darkened. Why? Because your mom said no. Simple, reasonable, obvious. Yet Lauren looked genuinely frustrated by the concept. That bothered me a lot, because no should have been enough, especially when spoken by the person who owned everything in question. Eventually, the conversation moved on. Sort of. Dinner continued, but the warmth never returned. Something had been exposed, something impossible to hide again. When I finally left that evening, Lauren hugged me goodbye. The hug felt different, forced, disappointed, almost resentful. As I drove home, I thought about everything that had happened. The prepared folder, the documents, the pressure, the frustration when I refused. And for the first time, a troubling possibility entered my mind. Maybe Lauren wasn't simply interested in my future assets. Maybe she was becoming impatient. And if that was true, then the situation was far more serious than I had originally believed. For 3 days after the dinner, Lauren didn't call. That alone told me a great deal. For weeks, she had been contacting me constantly, checking in, asking questions, offering help, showing concern. The moment I refused to sign those documents, the communication stopped. Not completely, but noticeably. The silence wasn't proof of anything by itself. Still, it added another piece to a growing puzzle, and I could no longer pretend I didn't see the picture forming. On the 4th day, I walked into my spare bedroom and looked at the memory box, the same box that had started everything. The same box Lauren had called a box of old stuff. It sat on a bookshelf where I had placed it after the retirement party. Quiet, unchanged, almost forgotten. Yet somehow it felt more important now than ever. I carried it into the living room and set it on my coffee table. Then I slowly opened the lid. The familiar scent of old paper greeted me. Photographs, letters, keepsakes, memories, pieces of a lifetime. I picked up one of the photographs. Lauren at age 7. Missing front teeth, holding my hand on her first day of school. I smiled despite myself. She had been so excited, so trusting, so full of love. Then I opened one of the letters. A letter I had written specifically for her retirement gift. A letter she never read. My eyes moved across the page. I had written about working double shifts to pay for her dance lessons, about driving through snowstorms to attend her school performances, about the nights I sat awake worrying about bills, about how proud I was every time she succeeded. Every word came from my heart, and she never even finished reading it. The realization hurt all over again, not because she rejected a gift, because she rejected the meaning behind it. I sat quietly for nearly an hour, thinking, remembering, grieving. Eventually I came to a conclusion. The memory box had failed, at least in the way I intended. It had not created connection. It had not created understanding. It had not reminded Lauren of what truly mattered. Perhaps because she never truly looked inside. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The next morning, I wrote a letter. Not a long one. Just a single page. Simple. Honest, direct, no anger, no accusations, no insults, only truth. When I finished, I placed the letter inside the memory box. Then I closed the lid. An hour later, I drove to a shipping center and mailed it. Addressed to Lauren. No explanation, no warning, nothing else. Just the box and the letter. The package arrived the following afternoon. I know because Lauren called less than an hour later. The moment I saw her name on my phone, I knew she had opened it. I answered calmly, "Hello?" "Mom!" Her voice sounded tense, very tense. "Did you send me the memory box?" "Yes." Silence, a long silence. Then, "Why?" I looked out my kitchen window. The autumn leaves were beginning to change colors. Orange, gold, red. Beautiful. Temporary. The answer felt strangely similar. "Because it belongs to you." Another silence. Then Lauren asked, "What is this letter supposed to mean?" I already knew which part had upset her. The entire letter had contained only a few paragraphs, but one sentence mattered more than all the others. "You taught me what my love was worth to you." That sentence had clearly found its target. "What part confused you?" I asked gently. Her frustration immediately surfaced. "Mom," I waited. "You know what I mean." Yes, I did, but I wanted her to say it. "I don't understand why you're acting like this." The irony almost made me laugh. Acting like this, as though the problem had appeared from nowhere, as though it had not been building for months, maybe years. I took a slow breath. "Lauren, what? Did you read the letters?" A pause. A very revealing pause. Then, "Some of them." "Some, not all, of course." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Did you read the one about your college graduation?" "No." "The one about your father?" "No." "The one about Noah?" "No." Silence. The answer told me everything. She still wasn't interested in the memories. She was interested in the conflict, not the meaning, the conflict. Eventually, she spoke again. "You hurt my feelings." The statement surprised me, not because it was impossible, because it felt backwards. I almost asked whether she understood what she had done to mine. Instead, I chose honesty. "You hurt mine first." The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. Because it contained truth neither of us could escape. When Lauren finally spoke, her voice had softened, only slightly. "I didn't mean to. I believed that, at least partly. Cruelty isn't always intentional. Sometimes it's selfishness, sometimes entitlement, sometimes carelessness. The result hurts just the same." "I know." Another pause. Then she asked a question that changed the entire conversation. "Is this about the paperwork?" There it was. Not the letters, not the photographs, not the retirement party. The paperwork, the assets, the ownership, the things she truly cared about. My heart sank. Again, because even now, she still didn't understand. "No." "Then what is it about?" I looked at the empty chair across from me. The chair where Michael used to sit. The chair that had remained empty for decades. And suddenly, the answer became very clear. "It's about value." "What does that mean?" "It means I spent weeks creating something from my heart." Silence. "And you looked at it for less than a minute." I heard her breathing. Nothing else. Then I continued. "You saw old stuff." Another silence, longer this time. Painful. Necessary. Finally, Lauren sighed. I think you're overreacting." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were cruel, because they revealed how little she understood, or perhaps how little she wanted to understand. The conversation ended shortly afterward, not with shouting, not with insults, with distance, The kind of emotional distance that develops when two people are standing in entirely different realities. After hanging up, I sat quietly for several minutes. Then my phone rang again. This time it was Ethan. Interesting. Very interesting, I answered. Hello? Monica. His voice sounded hesitant, almost nervous. Hi, Ethan. I hope I'm not bothering you. You're not. A brief pause. Then he surprised me. I read the letters. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I couldn't speak, because those 4 words meant more than he realized. Someone had actually read them. Someone had taken the time. I see. They were beautiful. Emotion tightened in my chest. Thank you. Another pause. Then Ethan said something I would never forget. Lauren doesn't understand what those letters cost you. Cost. Not money, not property, not assets, emotion, sacrifice, love. Finally, someone understood, and for the first time since the retirement party, I felt seen. Truly seen. But the conversation also confirmed something troubling. If Ethan could understand the value of the memory box, why couldn't Lauren? The answer frightened me, because I was beginning to suspect it wasn't a misunderstanding at all. It was a choice, and if that was true, then the decisions I needed to make next were becoming clearer every day. 3 days after my conversation with Ethan, I found myself sitting once again in Daniel Harper's office. This time, I wasn't there for answers. I was there for decisions. The difference mattered. The first meeting had been about understanding what was happening. The second was about determining what I wanted to do about it. Daniel greeted me with the same calm professionalism as before, but when he saw the expression on my face, he immediately understood something had changed. You've made up your mind. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Mostly. He motioned toward the chair across from his desk. Tell me. I sat down. For several seconds, I stared at the folder in my lap. Inside were notes, financial statements, property information, and perhaps, most importantly, clarity. Weeks earlier, I had been operating from emotion. Now, I was operating from reality. The difference was enormous. I don't want to punish Lauren. Daniel nodded. Good. I mean that. I know. I took a deep breath. But I also don't want to reward behavior that hurts people. The sentence felt strange coming out of my mouth. Not because it wasn't true, because I had spent most of my life doing exactly that, making excuses, forgiving too quickly, giving without limits, protecting people from consequences, especially Lauren. Daniel remained silent, allowing me to continue. I keep asking myself the same question. What question? If I weren't her mother, would I accept this treatment from anyone else? The answer came immediately. No, absolutely not. I would never tolerate it from a friend, a coworker, a neighbor, anyone. Yet motherhood had convinced me to tolerate things I would never accept elsewhere. That realization was painful, but necessary. Daniel leaned forward slightly. What do you want your estate to reflect? The question caught me off guard. Not who, what. The distinction mattered, because he wasn't asking where the money should go. He was asking what values should guide the decision. I thought about it carefully. Finally, I answered. Gratitude. He nodded. What else? Compassion. Another nod. Anything else? I smiled sadly. People who actually care. The room fell quiet. Not an uncomfortable silence, a thoughtful one. Then Daniel opened a legal pad. Let's start there. For the next 2 hours, we reviewed every asset I owned. The house, the cabin, investment accounts, retirement funds, savings, insurance policies, everything. For years, nearly all of it had been destined for Lauren. Now I was reconsidering that arrangement. Not because I stopped loving my daughter. That would never happen. Because love and accountability are not opposites. At least they shouldn't be. As we worked through the numbers, I found myself thinking about Grace. Her gratitude, her kindness, the way she had treated me when she had absolutely nothing to gain. Then I thought about the nursing profession, the profession that had shaped my entire life. The young nurses struggling under crushing student debt, the future caregivers who would one day care for people like me. An idea slowly began taking shape. By noon, it had become a plan. Daniel looked over his notes. You want to establish a scholarship fund? Yes. For nursing students? Yes. The answer felt right, deeply right, almost immediately, because that money would create opportunities, real opportunities. Just as others had once created opportunities for me. Daniel made additional notes. How much are you considering? I gave him a number. He raised his eyebrows, not because it was outrageous, because it was significant. I nodded. I've thought about it carefully. I can see that. Next came another decision, one that surprised even me. I want Grace included. Daniel looked up. The nurse. Yes. He waited, allowing me to explain. So I did. The surgery, the friendship, the certification program, her gratitude, her compassion, everything. When I finished, Daniel smiled. She sounds remarkable. She is. The answer came easily, because it was true, very true. We discussed several possibilities. Eventually, we settled on a meaningful but reasonable amount. Enough to help, not enough to create complications. The decision felt balanced. Fair. Then came another idea, one that had been growing quietly in the back of my mind, a local nonprofit organization, a group that helped elderly individuals who had been financially exploited by relatives. I had volunteered there occasionally. The stories were heartbreaking. Parents manipulated, grandparents pressured, widows convinced to surrender assets, people losing independence because they trusted the wrong family members. The more I learned about those situations, the more determined I became. Part of my estate would support that organization as well. Daniel wrote everything down, methodically, carefully. Then we reached the most difficult topic. Lauren, my daughter, the little girl I had spent decades loving. The woman who had broken my heart. The woman I still loved despite everything. What about her? Daniel asked gently. The question hung in the air. Heavy, complicated, painful. I looked down at my hands. For a moment, I saw myself as a younger woman, a tired widow working overnight hospital shifts, a mother sacrificing everything for her child. Then I saw the present, the eye roll, the paperwork, the conversations, the entitlement. Both versions existed simultaneously, and I couldn't ignore either one. Finally, I spoke. I don't want to disinherit her. Daniel nodded slowly. I think he had expected that answer, because despite everything, I wasn't interested in revenge. I wasn't interested in cruelty. I was interested in truth. And the truth was that Lauren was still my daughter. That would never change, but neither would the consequences of her choices. I want her to receive something meaningful. Daniel waited. Then I'd surprised both of us. The memory box. His expression softened. The original one. Yes, I smiled sadly, along with the letters. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The item she had dismissed, the item she considered worthless, the item she barely examined. That would become the most personal part of her inheritance, not because I wanted to punish her, because I wanted her to have one final opportunity to understand, one final opportunity to see me. Really see me. Then I added another condition, one Daniel found unusual but legally possible, a personal letter, to be delivered along with the memory box, a letter explaining every decision, every reason, every lesson, not angry, not vindictive, honest, the kind of letter a mother writes when she still hopes her child might learn something. Daniel finished taking notes, then leaned back. "How do you feel?" The question surprised me. I considered it carefully, then answered truthfully, "Peaceful." And I did. For the first time since the retirement party, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, not relief. Peace. Because the decisions reflected my values, not my anger, not my disappointment. My values. That distinction mattered enormously. Before I left, Daniel reviewed the preliminary structure one final time. The nursing scholarship, Grace, the senior advocacy organization, educational support for Noah's future, Lauren's revised inheritance. Everything. Balanced, intentional, meaningful. When I stood to leave, Daniel offered one final observation. "You know, Monica, most people revise their wills because they're angry." I smiled. "And me? I think you're revising yours because you're finally being honest." The statement stayed with me all the way home, because he was right. This wasn't about punishment. It was about honesty. Honesty about who had shown up for me. Honesty about what mattered. Honesty about what kind of legacy I wanted to leave behind. And although Lauren still had no idea what I had decided, I knew one thing with certainty. When she eventually learned the truth, it would change everything. The explosion came sooner than I expected. Less than 2 weeks after my meeting with Daniel, Lauren discovered that something had changed. To this day, I don't know exactly how. Maybe she contacted another attorney. Maybe she noticed paperwork. Maybe she simply sensed she was losing control of a situation she thought she understood. Whatever the reason, she called me on a Tuesday morning. And from the moment I answered, I knew this wasn't a normal conversation. "Mom!" Her voice was sharp, tight, angry. I set down my coffee cup. "Good morning to you too. Did you change your will?" There it was. No small talk, no greetings, straight to the point. I stared out my kitchen window for several seconds, not because I didn't know the answer, because I was surprised by the question itself. Most people would ask how their mother was doing. Lauren was asking about legal documents. "Why do you ask?" "Because I heard you met with Daniel." "Interesting. Very interesting." "I did." "Did you change it?" I could have lied. I could have avoided the conversation. But I was tired of avoidance, tired of pretending, tired of protecting everyone else's comfort at the expense of my own. "Yes." The silence lasted only a moment, then the storm arrived. "What is wrong with you?" I actually pulled the phone away from my ear, not because she was yelling, because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What? Why would you do that?" I took a slow breath. "Lauren." "No." Her voice grew louder. "I want an answer." The entitlement shocked me, not because it was new, because it was finally impossible to ignore. She wasn't asking why I had made a decision. She was demanding justification for having the right to make one. That difference mattered. A lot. "Would you like to come over?" I asked calmly. "What?" "We should discuss this face to face." The suggestion surprised her. I could hear it. Perhaps she expected defensiveness, or guilt, or excuses. Instead, I offered conversation. Real conversation. After a brief pause, she agreed. 3 hours later, Lauren pulled into my driveway. She arrived alone. No Ethan, no Noah, just Lauren. And the moment she stepped inside, I knew she was furious. Not disappointed, not hurt, furious. Her jaw was clenched, her posture rigid, her eyes blazing with frustration. I suddenly remembered the little girl who used to throw tantrums when she didn't get her way. The resemblance was unsettling. We sat across from each other in the living room. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, Lauren broke the silence. "How much did you change?" I blinked. Not hello. Not how are you. Not can we talk. How much did you change? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was revealing, very revealing. I don't think that's the right place to start. Then where should we start? I leaned back. Why are you upset? The question seemed reasonable. Her answer was immediate. Because this isn't fair. Fair. That word again. I had heard it many times throughout my life. Usually from people who wanted something. What isn't fair? You changing everything? I nodded slowly. What exactly belongs to you right now? The question caught her off guard. She stared at me, confused. What? What belongs to you right now? She didn't answer, because she couldn't. Nothing belonged to her. Not legally, not morally, not practically. Everything I owned still belonged to me. The reality seemed to irritate her. I'm your daughter. Yes. And the conversation paused. For a brief moment, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. Then it disappeared, replaced by anger. I've always been your beneficiary. Interesting choice of words. Beneficiary, not daughter, not family. Beneficiary. The distinction broke my heart. You know, I said quietly, when you were 8 years old, you used to tell people you were proud to be my daughter. She rolled her eyes, actually rolled her eyes. Again, just like the retirement party. We're not talking about when I was 8. No, I nodded. We're talking about now. The room became silent. Then Lauren leaned forward. Are you giving my inheritance away? The directness stunned me. Not because she asked, because she skipped every emotional step between. No concern, no curiosity, no reflection, straight to inheritance. I suddenly understood something important. This conversation wasn't about our relationship, at least not for her. It was about assets. And realizing that hurt more than I expected. I looked directly into her eyes. When did you start seeing me as property? The question landed hard, very hard. Her expression changed instantly. What? When did that happen? It didn't. Then why is this your first concern? Silence. Another uncomfortable silence. One she couldn't easily escape. Instead of answering, she changed tactics. A classic move. One I recognized immediately. Someone is influencing you. There it was. The accusation. I almost smiled, because Daniel had predicted it. Influencing me? Yes. She crossed her arms. This doesn't sound like you. I nodded slowly. Why? Because you've always taken care of family. I still do. Then why are you doing this? The answer came easily. Because I had spent weeks thinking about it. Because taking care of family and enabling bad behavior are not the same thing. The words hit their target. I could see it. Lauren stood abruptly. You think I'm a bad person? No. Then what do you think? I took a deep breath. I think you've become entitled. The room froze. Nobody likes hearing the truth, especially when part of them already suspects it's true. Lauren stared at me as if I had slapped her. Then her face hardened. What about Grace? There it was. The name. The first time she had spoken it. Interesting. Very interesting. I remained calm. What about her? I know she's involved somehow. The accusation almost sounded jealous, possessive, threatened. I suddenly wondered how much she had learned. Not enough, apparently. But enough to worry her. Grace isn't involved in this conversation. She's manipulating you. The statement was so absurd, I actually laughed. A short laugh, an honest one. Grace manipulating me. The woman who never asked for anything. The woman who thanked me repeatedly for kindness she didn't expect. The contrast between Grace and Lauren felt almost unbearable. No, I shook my head. She's not. Lauren's frustration grew. You don't know what you're doing. I stared at her, really stared. And for the first time in my life, I stopped seeing my daughter as a child. I saw her as an adult responsible for her own choices, an adult who expected access to things she hadn't earned, an adult who believed love should automatically translate into entitlement, an adult who had mistaken generosity for obligation. The realization was heartbreaking, but it was also clarifying. Then Lauren crossed a line. One I never expected. You've changed. I smiled sadly. You're right. That seemed to surprise her, because it was true. I had changed, not into someone cruel, into someone awake, into someone who finally understood that boundaries are not punishments. They are protection. When she spoke again, her voice was colder. If this continues, I may need to look into whether you're capable of making these decisions. The threat hung in the air, heavy, ugly, unmistakable. I felt my heart sink. Not because I was afraid, because I was disappointed, deeply disappointed. She was implying I might be mentally incompetent, not because she believed it, because it might help her challenge my choices. The realization shattered something inside me. A final illusion, a final excuse, a final piece of denial. And in that moment, I understood something with complete certainty. Lauren was no longer simply upset about money. She was willing to question my judgment in order to regain control. What she didn't know was that I had already anticipated that possibility. And I had spent weeks preparing for it. The meeting took place 10 days later. By then, Lauren had calmed down enough to stop making threats over the phone. At least openly. But Daniel Harper and I both knew the situation wasn't over. Far from it. The conversation at my house had changed something. The masks were slipping. And once people reveal their priorities, it becomes much harder for them to hide them again. The meeting itself was Lauren's idea. Not mine, not Daniel's. Lauren called and insisted we sit down together. She wanted answers. She wanted explanations. Most of all, I suspected she wanted control. The location was Daniel's office, neutral ground, professional ground, a place where emotions carried less weight than facts. When I arrived, Daniel was already waiting. So was Lauren. To my surprise, Ethan was there too. The moment I saw him, I understood something. This wasn't just about me anymore. Something had changed inside their marriage. The tension between them was impossible to miss. Lauren sat stiffly in her chair, arms crossed, jaw tight. Ethan sat beside her, but there was distance between them. Not physical distance, emotional distance. The kind that develops when trust begins cracking. Daniel greeted everyone and closed the conference room door. Then he sat down. For several moments, nobody spoke. Finally, Lauren broke the silence. Let's stop pretending. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Pretending? Yes. She looked directly at me. I want to know exactly what's going on. I remained calm. Okay? Okay? The simplicity of my response seemed to frustrate her. Yes. I folded my hands. What would you like to know? Her eyes narrowed. Why are you doing this? The same question. Again, only now we were sitting in an attorney's office instead of my living room. And somehow the answer felt even clearer. I'm making decisions about my estate. No. Lauren shook her head. I mean, why are you punishing me? Punishing. Interesting word. I looked toward Daniel, then back toward Lauren. Do you honestly think that's what this is? Yes. The answer came immediately, too immediately, as though she had rehearsed it. I nodded slowly. Then I reached into my purse. Lauren watched curiously. Daniel remained silent. I removed several printed pages. Simple sheets of paper, nothing dramatic, nothing complicated, just evidence. The first page was a screenshot of a text message. The message asking about the cabin deed. The second page contained another conversation. Questions about account ownership, questions about asset transfers, questions about paperwork, question after question. The same pattern repeated. I placed the pages on the table. Lauren's expression changed instantly. Not panic, recognition. She knew exactly what she was looking at. I don't understand. Her voice sounded weaker now. You don't understand. I kept my tone calm, very calm. The questions seem pretty clear. Lauren glanced toward Ethan, then back toward me. Those were normal questions. Perhaps, I nodded, individually. The room became quiet. I slid another page across the table, then another, then another. A timeline, dates, messages, conversations, everything. Weeks of growing interest in my finances. Weeks of increasingly specific questions. Weeks of documented behavior. I hadn't prepared it for a courtroom. I had prepared it for myself, to ensure I wasn't imagining things, to ensure emotion wasn't distorting reality. Now it sat on the table, reality in black and white. Lauren's frustration began returning. You're making this look worse than it is. Before I could answer, Ethan spoke, the first time he had spoken since the meeting began. Are they wrong? The room froze. Lauren looked at him, shocked, genuinely shocked, because she had expected support, not questions. Ethan? No. His voice remained calm, almost painfully calm. Answer the question. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Lauren laughed nervously. This is ridiculous. But Ethan didn't smile. Didn't laugh. Didn't look away. He simply waited. And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't the first conversation they'd had about this. Not even close. The tension I noticed earlier suddenly made sense. The disagreement had already begun. Now it was simply happening in public. Daniel remained silent, watching, observing, exactly as attorneys often do. Finally, Lauren spoke. I was trying to help. Ethan nodded. Maybe. The answer surprised everyone, including me, because it wasn't an accusation. It was honesty. Then he continued. But somewhere along the way, I think you stopped hearing yourself. The statement landed hard. Very hard. Lauren stared at him. You think I'm the bad guy? No. His voice softened. I think you've become focused on the wrong things. The room felt smaller, tighter, more emotional, because for the first time, someone besides me was saying what needed to be said. Not cruelly, not angrily, honestly. Lauren's eyes immediately filled with tears, but something about those tears felt different. Not grief, not regret, frustration, the frustration of losing an argument, not the pain of understanding, at least not yet. Then she turned toward me. You've been talking about me behind my back. The accusation surprised me, because it wasn't true. No? You've obviously been telling people things. I shook my head. No. Daniel spoke for the first time in several minutes. Lauren, she looked toward him. Your mother hasn't needed to tell anyone anything. Silence. Then Daniel gently tapped the papers. The messages speak for themselves. The words carried weight because they were true, painfully true. No interpretation was necessary, no manipulation, no exaggeration. Just her own words, her own questions, her own priorities. The room remained quiet. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan reached into his briefcase, pulled out a folded sheet of paper, and placed it on the table. What is that? Lauren asked. His expression changed, sad, disappointed, tired. I read the letters. The memory box, the letters, the gift she had dismissed. Lauren looked confused. What does that have to do with anything? Everything. It had everything to do with everything. Ethan looked directly at her. Because I finally understood what your mother was trying to give you. The silence that followed felt endless. I could barely breathe. Not because of the conflict, Because someone understood. Someone had truly understood. Ethan continued, "You thought she was giving you property." His voice remained calm. "She was giving you herself." The words hit all of us, including Lauren, especially Lauren. For the first time, I saw uncertainty replace anger. Only briefly. But it was there, a crack, a tiny crack. Then Lauren's eyes moved toward the documents again. Toward the evidence. Toward the reality she could no longer dismiss. And something changed. Not enough. Not yet. But enough. Because for the first time since all of this began, she stopped arguing, stopped defending, stopped explaining. She simply sat there, quiet. And in that silence, I realized something important. The goal had never been to humiliate her. The goal had never been revenge. The goal was truth. And truth had finally entered the room. Whether Lauren accepted it or not was no longer something I could control. But she had heard it. Everyone had, including herself. And as the meeting came to an end, I had the strange feeling that the real consequences were only beginning. Not legal consequences. Personal ones. The kind that follow you home. The kind that wait for you in the mirror. The kind that force you to ask whether you've become someone you no longer recognize. The weeks following the meeting at Daniel Harper's office were surprisingly quiet. Not peaceful. Quiet. There is a difference. Peace comes from resolution. Silence often comes from avoidance. And Lauren was avoiding something. Maybe me. Maybe herself. Maybe the uncomfortable truths that had surfaced during that meeting. Whatever the reason, communication nearly disappeared. The daily calls stopped. The constant questions vanished. The sudden interest in my paperwork evaporated. For the first time in months, my phone remained silent. Part of me felt relieved. Another part felt deeply sad, because no matter what had happened, Lauren was still my daughter. I didn't wake up one morning and stop loving her. Mothers don't work that way. At least I didn't. Love remained, trust did not, and learning to separate those two things became one of the hardest lessons of my life. A few days after the meeting, Ethan called. Not to discuss money, not to discuss legal matters, just to check on me. "How are you doing?" he asked. The question felt almost strange. So many recent conversations had revolved around conflict that simple kindness caught me off guard. "I'm okay." "Really?" I smiled. "Mostly." He laughed softly. "That's probably the most honest answer possible." We talked for nearly an hour. About Noah, about retirement, about life. Eventually, the conversation shifted toward Lauren. Not dramatically, naturally. "She's struggling," Ethan admitted. I looked out my kitchen window. Autumn had deepened. Leaves covered parts of the yard. The season felt appropriate somehow. Things changing, things ending, things preparing for something new. "What kind of struggling?" A long pause followed. Then Ethan answered carefully. "I think she's realizing how this looks." The statement lingered in my mind, because appearances weren't really the issue. Reality was. Still, I understood his point. For perhaps the first time Lauren had been forced to view her own behavior through someone else's eyes. That experience can be painful, especially when the reflection isn't flattering. A week later, I met Patricia for lunch. We sat outside a small cafe overlooking a park. Children played nearby. Dogs chased tennis balls. Normal life continued, as it always does, no matter how dramatic our personal problems feel. Patricia listened as I updated her. Then she asked a question. "Do you regret it?" I knew exactly what she meant. The will, the boundaries, the confrontation, everything. I considered the question carefully, then shook my head. "No," she smiled. "Good. But I do regret that it became necessary." That answer felt closer to the truth. because I never wanted any of this. I never wanted conflict. I never wanted distance. I never wanted my daughter questioning my decisions or threatening my competence. What I wanted was simple: respect, understanding, love. The fact that those things had become complicated still hurt. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Grace invited me to a community fundraiser, a scholarship event for nursing students. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. I accepted immediately. The event was wonderful. Young nurses, future caregivers, people filled with purpose and hope. For the first time in a long while, I felt energized, useful, connected. Several students shared stories about financial hardship, about dreams they were struggling to afford. Listening to them reinforced something important. The decisions I had made about my estate weren't rooted in anger. They were rooted in values. That distinction continued giving me peace. Near the end of the evening, Grace pulled me aside. "I have something to tell you." Her smile looked nervous. "What is it?" I was promoted. The pride in her voice made me grin immediately. "Grace, that's wonderful." She laughed. "I wanted you to know first." The words hit me unexpectedly, not because of the promotion, because she wanted me to know first. Not a financial question, not a request, not an expectation. A moment of gratitude, a moment of connection, a moment shared simply because she cared. Driving home that night, I found myself thinking about family again. Not blood, not inheritance. Family. The people who celebrate your victories. The people who show up when things are difficult. The people who value you instead of what you own. The thought stayed with me for days. Then, nearly 3 weeks after the meeting, a letter arrived. Handwritten, unexpected. The return address belonged to Lauren. I stared at the envelope for several minutes before opening it. My hands actually trembled, not because I feared the contents, because I hoped for them. Hope can be dangerous, even after disappointment, especially after disappointment. Eventually, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single letter, 3 pages long. I read every word slowly. Then I read it again. Lauren apologized. Not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely, at least more genuinely than anything I had received from her in months. She admitted she had become focused on the wrong things. She admitted she had taken certain assumptions for granted. She admitted reading more of the letters from the memory box. That part caught my attention immediately, especially one letter, the one about Michael, the one about her father, the one she previously hadn't bothered reading. According to Lauren, it made her cry. For a long time, I sat quietly after finishing the letter, unsure how to feel. Hopeful, cautious, sad, relieved, all at once. The apology didn't erase everything. It couldn't. Trust doesn't rebuild itself overnight. But it mattered, because accountability matters, effort matters, growth matters. Later that evening, my phone rang. Lauren. For several seconds, I simply stared at the screen. Then I answered. "Hello?" Silence. Then, "Hi, Mom." Her voice sounded different, softer, smaller, almost vulnerable. The conversation that followed wasn't magical. There were no dramatic speeches, no instant reconciliation. Real life rarely works that way. Instead, there was honesty. Awkward honesty. Painful honesty. Necessary honesty. She apologized again. I listened. I accepted the apology, but I didn't immediately restore everything. And surprisingly, she didn't ask me to. That detail mattered more than anything she said. Because for the first time, the conversation wasn't about inheritance. It wasn't about ownership. It wasn't about future assets. It was about us. Mother and daughter. Two flawed human beings trying to navigate the damage between them. When the call ended, I felt something unfamiliar. Not certainty. Possibility. The possibility that Lauren might actually learn from all of this. The possibility that people can change when they're willing to face uncomfortable truths. The possibility that healing might still exist. But healing doesn't mean forgetting, and it certainly doesn't mean surrendering boundaries. Those lessons had cost me too much to lose. Soon, Lauren and I would have one final conversation. A conversation about the memory box, about the will, about love, and about the difference between inheritance and legacy. A difference she was only beginning to understand. 3 weeks after Lauren's letter arrived, we met at the lake cabin. The cabin, the property that had somehow become a symbol of everything that had gone wrong between us. For months, it had represented ownership, inheritance, expectation, conflict. I wanted it to represent something else before our story ended. Understanding. The drive north was quiet, peaceful. The trees were dressed in late autumn colors, and the lake reflected the gray morning sky like polished glass. I arrived first. Not because I was eager, because I needed a few moments alone. The cabin had always been my sanctuary, a place where life slowed down, a place where noise disappeared, a place where truth felt easier to hear. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of cedar greeted me immediately. Memories followed. Family weekends, summer cookouts, Noah fishing from the dock. Quiet evenings spent reading beside the fireplace. This place held pieces of my life. Perhaps that was why I had protected it so fiercely. Not because of its value, because of its meaning. About 20 minutes later, Lauren arrived. She stepped inside slowly, nervously. For the first time in a very long while, she looked uncertain. Not defensive, not angry, uncertain. The difference mattered. We hugged, a simple hug, nothing dramatic. Yet, it felt like a beginning. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once imagined future family gatherings. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Lauren broke the silence. "I've been reading the letters." I smiled faintly. "All of them." She nodded. 3 times. Emotion tightened in my chest. Not because she finally read them, because she finally understood why they existed. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't see it. The words came out quietly, broken, painfully honest. "I know." "No." She shook her head. "You don't understand." I remained silent, letting her continue. "I thought I understood your life." She looked down at the table. "But I only knew the easy version." The statement hurt, yet it also healed, because it was true. For decades, I had hidden the difficult parts, the sacrifices, the loneliness, the fear, the exhaustion. I had protected Lauren from those realities. And in doing so, I may have accidentally hidden the cost of love itself. Lauren wiped her eyes. "The letter about college destroyed me." I remembered that letter. The one describing the nights I skipped meals to pay tuition bills. The one describing second jobs and overtime shifts. The one describing fears I never shared. "I had no idea." "I know." Again, silence. Not uncomfortable silence. Healing silence. The kind that appears when people finally stop defending themselves and start listening. Eventually, Lauren spoke again. "I became someone I don't like." The honesty surprised me, not because it wasn't true, because she was finally willing to say it. "I got comfortable." She laughed bitterly. "Maybe that's the nicest way to describe it." I said nothing, because this wasn't my confession. It was hers. She continued. "I started assuming things." The word assuming hung in the air. Heavy, accurate, dangerous. I assumed the house would eventually be mine. I nodded. I assumed the cabin would be mine. Another nod. I assumed everything would be mine. There it was, the truth, finally spoken aloud. Not hidden, not disguised, not wrapped inside words like practical or planning or convenience. Just truth. Lauren looked directly at me. And the worst part? I waited. I stopped seeing you. Tears filled my eyes immediately, because that sentence captured everything. Every argument, every misunderstanding, every painful moment. She hadn't stopped loving me, at least not entirely. She had simply stopped seeing me as a person, a woman, a mother, a human being. Instead, I had gradually become part of her future plans, part of her assumptions, part of her expectations. And somewhere along the way, she forgot that I was still alive, still feeling, still growing, still making choices. The realization clearly devastated her. And strangely enough, it hurt me less than I expected. Because accountability changes things, not instantly, but meaningfully. After a long silence, Lauren asked the question I knew was coming. What happens now? I smiled softly. The answer had become very clear. Now, she nodded. Now we move forward. Confusion crossed her face. That's it, I laughed. What did you expect? I don't know. Her voice cracked. Maybe for you to tell me I ruined everything. The sadness in her expression broke my heart. Because despite everything, she was still my daughter, and despite everything, I still loved her. No. I reached across the table and took her hand. You hurt me. She nodded. I know. But hurting me isn't the same thing as losing me. That sentence seemed to overwhelm her. Tears rolled freely down her face. For several moments, she couldn't speak. When she finally managed to, her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. And for the first time, I believed every word, not because of emotion, because of growth. The apology no longer sounded like damage control. It sounded like understanding. There is a difference, a huge difference. A little later, I stood and walked toward a nearby shelf. The memory box sat there, waiting. The same box that had started everything. The same box she once dismissed. The same box that eventually taught both of us something important. I carried it back to the table, then placed it in front of her. Lauren stared at it, almost afraid to touch it. Mom, I smiled. Take it. Fresh tears appeared. This is still the most valuable thing I'm leaving you. She looked confused, then emotional, then grateful, all at once. The letters, the pictures, those two. I touched the lid gently. Everything inside this box represents a life spent loving you. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then I added the final truth. The will isn't my legacy. Lauren looked at me. The money isn't my legacy. Silence. The house isn't my legacy. More silence. I placed my hand over hers. You are. That was the moment she finally broke. Not dramatically, quietly. The way people break when they finally understand what almost slipped away. We sat together for a long time after that, talking, remembering, healing. Not solving everything. Healing doesn't work that way. It takes time, patience, consistency. But for the first time in a very long while, we were moving in the right direction. And as the afternoon sunlight reflected across the lake outside, I realized something. The greatest gift I could leave my daughter wasn't money. It wasn't property. It wasn't even forgiveness. It was the opportunity to become better than she had been. And finally, she was ready to accept it. If this experience taught me anything, it's that love and entitlement can sometimes wear similar faces. As parents, many of us spend decades sacrificing for our children. We work longer hours, postpone our dreams, and quietly carry burdens they may never fully understand. We do it willingly because love often asks us to give without keeping score. But there is a difference between giving and surrendering. There is a difference between supporting someone and teaching them that your sacrifices are guaranteed obligations. For many years, I believed that loving my daughter meant saying yes to everything. It meant protecting her from disappointment, excusing her mistakes, and putting her needs before my own. What I eventually learned is that healthy love also requires boundaries. Boundaries are not punishments. They are acts of self-respect. And self-respect is something every person deserves, no matter their age. Another lesson I learned is that gratitude matters more than inheritance. Money can be spent, property can be sold, assets can disappear. But gratitude shapes character. A grateful heart values people more than possessions. An entitled heart often does the opposite. The greatest legacy we leave behind is not found in a bank account or a legal document. It is found in the lives we touch, the kindness we show, and the values we pass on to the people we love. I also learned that forgiveness does not mean forgetting. Forgiveness means releasing bitterness while still honoring the lessons you learned. You can forgive someone and still maintain boundaries. You can love someone and still expect better from them. Most importantly, I learned that it is never too late for growth. Not for parents, not for children, not for families. Sometimes the hardest conversations become the beginning of healing. And sometimes the things we value least end up becoming the most precious things we have. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt taken for granted by someone you loved? Or have you ever realized you were focusing on the wrong things in life? Share your experience in the comments. Your story may help someone else who is going through something similar. And if you enjoy emotional family stories with meaningful life lessons, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows these stories to continue reaching people who need them. Before you go, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I always love reading your comments and connecting with viewers from different places. Thank you for spending this time with me, and remember, the most valuable inheritance we leave behind is not what we own, it is how we loved.